Hello, folks online. I just kind of wanted to share a bit of my internal dialogue that I've been having today, and for a while, thinking about shame. And so a while back, I made a video about the shame rage cycle of people with narcissistic personality disorder, and it really was a new understanding to dawn on me that oftentimes narcissistic rage comes from the inability to process such deep-seated inner shame. And I've always kind of been of the belief that shame, in the right amount, is a necessary experience when you've been doing incorrect things or hurtful things to others, right? And recently I've come to the understanding of the difference between guilt and shame. And so guilt says I did something wrong and I need to fix it, and shame says there is something wrong with me. And so I kind of feel like in the right dosage, a certain level of shame that says, hey, there's something wrong with me, can be like a really good catalyst for change. Like, say you've been lying to people in your life about something or whatever. Maybe it's, some kind of character or personality flaw that you've had for a very long time. Coming to self-awareness and feeling that shame can be really helpful, honestly. It could say, wow, I've been doing this wrong consistently. This is bad about me. But I've been thinking, too, today about how perhaps it is like an overdosage of shame that keeps people in those cycles. What first got me thinking about that was, God, watching the Elizabeth chicken broth shit, If you guys aren't familiar, go watch CC Suarez's stuff and the Elizabeth podcast. But, it seems like she really cannot face all the things she's done, because when she does, she starts to feel such intense shame that she, as a self-preservation method, her brain makes her shut it down, and she keeps it out of her mind instead of processing all of that in shame, because it's so much and so intense, because she has done a lot of really terrible things, allegedly, right? And then it kind of got me thinking about my own life and how I've definitely felt a lot of shame, possibly too much for, the things that I've done, though, of course I've made lots of mistakes. I've found myself ruminating and spiraling into shame, and it makes it that much harder for me to work on the things I'm ashamed of. But something specifically Elizabeth said was something along the lines of that she'll start to do better, but in the back of her mind, she kind of thinks that's just who I am. And so that tells me about shame, because shame says I'm a bad person, or I can't do anything right, or whatever, like that. And so, I don't know, it just has made me wonder, what is there maybe something, a right level of shame, or is there a way to process shame that we're all missing that, could help everyone, some kind of, I don't know, step-by-step process to handle shame and get it to the right amount, I think it's really hard to forgive ourselves when we have done objectively wrong things, but just with the state of the world, ruminating on something negative for too long really zaps your motivation, and so I don't know, I've been pondering and finding it very interesting to think about, because at first, when I was learning, the difference between guilt and shame, I'm oh, is shame just something that only negatively affects us, and maybe we need guilt rather than shame when we've done things wrong? But I think for people who have denied that feeling of guilt for so long, perhaps it turns into shame. So when you do something wrong, and instead of facing that guilt, you turn it away and play a blind eye to it, over time, perhaps that becomes an internalized sense of identity, oh, I'm the person who doesn't feel guilty when I do these things. But maybe you have been feeling guilty and you just didn't face it because it was so difficult and you didn't take the time to process it, I find a lot of negative emotions are that way. They're really difficult to process, but when we don't, they compound and sometimes transform into something even worse. And so that's kind of my working theory right now, is that unprocessed guilt over time repeatedly will transform into a sense of shame, which is seeing or thinking that you are just intrinsically a bad person. And so wondering how we combat that, on a small and large scale. I know it's really hard to face those shameful parts of ourselves, and even the things we feel guilty about. But I don't know. I think it's definitely easier to process when you're feeling guilt and shame over things you really don't need to be feeling guilt or shame over. Like, oh man, I spent a day resting, not doing anything. I'm such a lazy piece of shit. Like, obviously, people don't need to feel guilty about that. You're allowed to rest. You're supposed to rest some days, But then when it comes to people like that scam others or consistently lie to others, steal things, like, I do think that a certain level of shame is necessary to kind of wake them up to the fact that they need to be feeling guilt and they need to be working on redemption instead, That's the thing, that we can't really redeem ourselves if we won't admit to ourselves that we did wrong. And not just ourselves, but part of redemption is admitting to the people we wronged that we did them wrong, validating their feelings, and it's all hard, and I think I'm feeling a lot of empathy today for everyone who is feeling a sense of shame regardless of what they've done. And that's kind of a weird feeling for me too, because there's definitely parts of me that want to feel justified in feeling angry with people who hurt others, but at the same time too, I'm wondering if it's not the fact that so many people feel the way I do, and that makes them, that not necessarily makes them, but that furthers their internalized sense of shame and makes it even more unbearable for them, and then it's kind of like a negative self-fulfilling prophecy, the more we can't confront our shame, the more we identify with the shame, and the more we continue actions that will cause us even greater shame. And so I don't know, just wondering how people get out of that when they're so deep in the trenches, I feel like with myself, like, in one regard, I was almost lucky that I don't believe I've done a lot of things to really hurt other people. I mostly spend my time feeling guilty or ashamed of things that I probably really shouldn't, or lies that come from my own head, that came from my mother's voice in childhood, being constantly bullied and told just how terrible I am for no reason. I think it's a lot easier to work through that. Not that it's easy at all, but it's easier to logically work through, at least, as opposed to when you have objectively done immoral or even illegal things, to justify those things, because there really isn't any logical justification for it. There just needs to be repentance for it. So I guess, I don't know, it's hard, because like I said, there's one part of me that wants to be angry at people that hurt others and do things maliciously, but then there's the other part of me that wonders if it's not adding, if me feeling that way doesn't add on and compound the shame and then further perpetuate the bad actions, It's just, it's a weird train of thought and feeling to be in. I've really been on this kick of reflecting, though, on, making sure that I don't dehumanize others, even if I feel logically justified in being angry or upset with people. And it's really hard, but I know at the end of the day that when we dehumanize others, that's what gives us all these ethical allowances or loopholes that really make our actions and trains of thought unethical, because the root of ethics is that it needs to be equally applied to everyone in every context, right? And that's why ethics is so difficult, and we've been studying it for so long, because there are so many nuances in different contexts that create these different scenarios, where one thing that is typically ethical is not ethical in this scenario, right? I don't know, it's just, it's tricky. I want to make sure, though, that I don't ever dehumanize people, even if I disagree with them, even if I think they are dehumanizing others or being monsters. I don't want to be like that. I want to always see the humanity behind people. And as a human myself, I know just how flawed and fucked up we are, and how much we can feel shame over that, and how much that shame can eat us up inside and make us almost turn off our conscience to survive. And that's really sad to me, and I think that deserves, empathy as well. And I do want to always find a way to cultivate love and forgiveness for everyone. I'm not there yet, but I would love to be, you know? It's hard. So, if anyone has anything to add on, or maybe some kind of perspective I'm not seeing, I would love to hear it. Just kind of wanted to share a bit of where my mind is at right now, though. Shame is a tricky beast, I do still feel like some degree of shame can be helpful. But too much shame I definitely think is detrimental. And I don't think I really realized that for a while. But yeah, I really am starting to think that too much shame is honestly the root of a lot of maladaptive behaviors and socially hurtful actions, and even self-hurting actions, I mean, we do know that shame causes, a lot of self-harming actions, but I really do think that perhaps extreme shame also causes people to hurt other people. Just like the shame rage cycle of narcissists, they don't know how to process such extreme amounts of shame, and so they turn it into rage, and it's like that shutting off of the self-awareness and consciousness and channeling it as blame to someone else. And you see that a lot with people that are always the victims, and I see it with my past self that always felt like a victim, and I think that's why my heart hurts for people that are still stuck in that, because that's where I was too, and I know how much I was hurting. And so it's interesting as we heal the level of, I guess, like retroactive shame that comes with the realization of where we used to be. And that's why I think a lot of people too become very like judgmental of others once they maybe get sober or find a religion. They can't handle that shame that they used to be like that, and so they demonize and dehumanize the other person. Yeah, and that's where we get, like, hypocristians, the Christians that are just super hypocritical. It's like, you used to party and sell drugs, and now you, like, want to kill drug dealers. And it's like, what? Like, I don't know. I think any point of view that makes us forget another's humanity is something that needs to be re-examined carefully. And it's really easy to get caught up in the emotions of self-righteousness or anger or just like feeling victimized. I was gonna say victim-y, but I just wanted to ramble a bit and share what I've been thinking about today. Again, I would love to hear anyone else's thoughts, and I hope anyone watching this has a good day, and if you're feeling shame, kind of like reconsider what level of shame would be helpful to you and where that threshold is that it crosses into detrimental, to the point where you can't handle it. And I think similarly with shame, like trauma, sometimes we can only take a bit at a time. I have a lifetime's worth of trauma. I could not feel all that trauma in one moment. I would fucking explode, It's been a long, gradual process of letting bits of trauma hit me at a time. And I think maybe with people who deal with intense shame, it's going to be kind of like that too. If you have done a lot of objectively wrong things, you're going to have to take it slowly as it comes and really feel with your heart, mind, and soul, like, how much you can take before it turns into where you just turn it off and you ignore it and you keep perpetuating the bad cycles, At least that's how I've had to do with trauma, So yeah, I'll end this here. I hope everyone has a good one. Bye.